Have you ever wondered who are you beyond your job? Or what is an organization without its people, product and structures? Many of us identify ourselves with the organization we work with. The job crisis due to the current pandemic has pushed people and organizations to an identity crisis. Whether you are an individual or an organization, getting in touch with your true identity is crucial for your self-esteem and self-worth. To have a better understanding of all this, HR Interact had recently organized a webinar and called "Are You Independent or Independent?" It was a participative webinar and the webinar was quite informative. Participants were asked to create self-identity as well as identity of their organization, and they also were guided on how to keep a balance between both the identities so that both the identities can coexist. So here we present you the recording of the webinar. Please view and have good learning. Thank you.
Great. So good morning, everyone. Hope you and your loved ones are doing great. It's a lovely rainy day, and I'm sure you're sipping some nice hot chai or coffee as you like it. Happy Independence Day to you, and happy Saturday as well. I know we're meeting after a long time, and the last few months have been extremely tough and challenging for mankind as we know it, but we've stayed strong, we've endured, and a big kudos to each one of you for that amazing spirit. So on that note, let me welcome all of you to our event today on Are You Independent or Are You Independent? So we'll talk more on that as we move forward, but let's begin with our ritual by knowing about the HR Interact. So HR Interact, as we all know, is an empowered community of connected and amazing HR professionals like yourselves. We believe in the magic of co-creation and interactive learning. And we also, most importantly, believe that, the community comes together and, contributes to the learning and knowledge sharing, for each member. So we believe in the collective wisdom than the individual wisdom. It's been over 2 years that HR Interact has been doing its bit to contribute to the HR community. And over the last 2 years, we've had over 9 events. So thanks to everyone for joining, making time on Saturday. And with that, I would like Wahid to please introduce our facilitators today. Wahid?
Thank you, Tulsi. Great.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Let me introduce you to our sponsor for this event and brilliant facilitators, Adi Raheja and Elora Rath.
Yes. So who are we as an organization? Alive in Connection is an OD consulting firm which partners with individuals, group and organizations, big and small, in unblocking their creative expressions and support them in their journey of growth and development. What do? We work in the areas of organization assessment, culture building, leadership development, diversity and inclusion, coaching for growth, creative exploration, and employee well-being. How do we do it? Okay, we believe in establishing a deeper connect with self and others as the basis of human existence. And this encourages and guides us to live purposefully and bring meaning to our lives and those around us. So as a part of AIC's philosophy, it's Alive in Connections philosophy, we work around stories of our existence as individuals, communities, organizations. We explore the strengths and identities through stories, and they form basis of connection. This is all about Alive in Connection. If you wish to know more about us and the work we do, please feel to connect us at connect@aliveinconnection.com. We'll be happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elora. And the way you were talking about the introduction, I was going back to the memory lane, studying together and then, in fact, talking about all that we believe into, and then coming together, working together in this form of the organization. And yes, I would like to reiterate, share my share of the feeling, and that is it's a matter of pride to talk about Alive in Connection, our baby, here in front of so many different people as an organization, about what we stand for, what we believe into. So we surely love to hear from some people about if they would like to know more about the organization. The email ID is right there in front of you. And I'm glad because I have been there in HR Interact right from the beginning. I'm also happy in a dual role today, or dual triple role today, because this is one of the shortest sponsor introductions we ever had. Okay, so thank you for that short introduction too. So with this, let's go ahead with the program, guys. What we have been waiting for and talking about. A happy Independence Day to all of you. And the question is, are you independent or independent? So with this program, let me take you through the context of the program. So you see what's happening in the world outside today. There is a situation that we are into that none of us actually ever imagined. We never thought that we'll fall into this situation. And in this situation, it is pushing governments, people, organizations, structures into a survival strategy. Now, organizations as a survival strategy are doing a lot of things. Some of them are changing businesses. Some of them are doing, cost cutting. Some of them are doing layoffs and so many different things to save money, to survive in the industry today. Now, well, that's natural. That cannot be questioned because that's a part of how every organization thinks about it. But the question is, what is it doing to the organization itself? And what is it doing to the people? And here we see a lot of rising sense of job insecurity today. And organizations also, the way they are taking decisions, we keep on thinking about them, that are they doing it in the right way, not in the right way? So there was an area where we thought an exploration was essential. And this area was what is happening to the individual identity and what's happening to the organizational identity in this process when they're dealing with this crisis to work towards their survival. And this program is entirely about that. Just what I assure you of today, like every HR Interact program, it's going to be an interactive workshop. And with this assurance, I also come up with an expectation here that I would request you to participate fully. You know the model that HR Interact works with. You know that all programs are participative. These are not speaker-driven programs. These are facilitated workshops. We are going to use some wonderful processes with you guys today. And in return, what you're going to get is some great insights from all the people here who are there in terms of how we can explore individual and organizational identities. That's your first takeaway. The second, we are planning to run a survey during the workshops. You also get a report. So everybody who fills the survey also gets a report of the survey, which can also be very insightful. And third, all the decisions that we're going to explore, you also get a copy of those decisions in a formatted way so that which you can go back and use in the organization today. So stay tuned in and participate fully whenever it comes.
Okay, so now it's introduction time. So please grab your chat window and introduce yourself. Please take a minute to introduce yourself on the chat window. Can we just focus on the chat window and notice what's unique about the introduction? What do you notice here? In all your introductions, what do you notice? So, with all your inputs on the introduction, one thing that stands out, one thing that's common with all the introductions is all our introductions are supported by our company, our designations. It's our name, our designation, and our company. So our identity stands with the identity of our company, our work, our job. So with this, let's move ahead and explore the content of the session today. So we will be covering the session in three parts. The part A would talk about the identity crisis from an individual perspective. So we move ahead with this part. The first part talking about individual crisis at an individual perspective.
Thank you, Elora. And it's really wonderful to see these introductions here. All the people have really joined, and I welcome you all again. Let me ask you a question, and which I want you to reply on chat. So we're going to do brainstorming on chat today. That's how I'm calling it, as a chat storm. Okay. So if you were to represent a job holder through a metaphor, then what it would be and why? Guys, I want everybody's response to this one, and it would be interesting to see how everybody is thinking of different metaphors. Now, what's a metaphor? when you say this thing is like, so whatever it is like is a metaphor. So it can be some other object, something, some abstract thought, or any person, or anything that you see in the world. I'm not giving you examples because then that will just, load you with those examples and make you think in a particular direction. So I want you to get creative. Think of a metaphor which describes a job holder today. And why do you think? So also write your reason. Why do you think the job holder can be represented by that particular metaphor? Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a minute or so to see your responses. And then we move on to the next question that I would like to ask you. And these are very interesting responses here. So I'll just read the ones we already have got. And that is, job holder is like a machine. And it's also like a joker. So it's bread and butter. Okay. Pendulum, like water. Wow. So when I was framing this question, I never thought that I would get responses like this, I think. Elora, isn't that interesting?
My metaphor would be a man carrying a burden on the shoulders.
Man carrying a burden.
Yeah, a big sack on the shoulder.
There's one very nice one which I've got from Santosh here and talks about oxygen, and that's an interesting one too. All right, so with all these metaphors that you have asked, I would now like to ask the next question. And the next question, I would request you to respond on Slido. So I'm going to paste a Slido link on the chat window. So this is going to happen in this program about 3 times. I'm going to tell you to click on certain links and put your response there. Okay, this is important for us to capture the responses in a particular way so that we can use it later on. So once you do that, you come back to Zoom window while you'll still be able to hear my voice when you're doing that. So let's look at the question first. And the question is, what attributes can you use to describe a job holder? Okay, or job holder's identity. So if I have to talk about a job holder's identities and what are the qualities, what are the attributes around it? So yeah, so the poll is live. Would you like to go ahead and start responding to the poll, and I can show you how it's being appearing up? So we already started getting some responses here. 2 people have responded. You can give multiple responses, in fact. It's wonderful to see the screen changing, the way you're responding. The most written responses are being picked up and made bold by the software. Also tells what is the commonality between the responses here. So I can read responses like adaptability, positive attitude, passionate, value addition, learning mindset, self-worth, workaholic, pride, go-getter, provider, work ethic. So we will have to pause this now and move on. So what we did so far, we are doing part A. In part A, we're exploring individual identity. We did metaphor. And then later on, what we did next was about the attributes. So where does this take us? Let's look at that with Elora.
Okay, so now let us move ahead and explore what is really individual identity. So I think this concept will help you relate to what you just mentioned on Slido. So what is it? What is individual identity? Individual identity is all the associations, it can be an association with your values, practices, possessions, beliefs, creations, interests, habits, choices, relationships, anything that an individual associates himself or herself with becomes the identity and called an individual identity. Now let us look at what happens when one of these identities that you have associated so strongly with gets lost. When you experience a loss in any of these associations, what you experience is called a crisis. And that is nothing but an identity crisis. So what is the connection now, and why are we talking about identity crisis? That takes us to our next concept in individual identity called enmeshment. Now we all must be wondering, what does this word enmeshment mean? It sounds very interesting, and so is the concept. The concept of enmeshment, it is a situation where the boundaries between individuals and the association that gets blurred. You know you differentiate yourself with the thing that you associate with. Your individual identity is lost completely, and you kind of completely become one with that association of yours. And it can be any association, as I said. It can be an association of your value, job, practice, belief, interest, habit, anything, or maybe a person, a relationship. So this individual identity loses its importance when it is enmeshed with this association. And enmeshment prevents development of a independent sense of self. A stable, independent sense of self is lost. And that's where the question pops up. Who am I? Who am I? That's a crisis question. Now, how does this happen? So to understand this a little better, let us move towards the next concept of workism. So workism, what does workism say? Workism is nothing but a culture. Workism as a culture values what you produce is more important than who you are. So it gives more importance to what you do than who you are as a person. So since this importance becomes so heavy, one starts associating more and more with one's job. We get tied up to a job. We completely identify ourselves with the job. We get enmeshed badly. And also the belief that creeps in is that work requires sacrifice. And what sacrifice here are we making? We are talking about sacrifice of who we are. So when we sacrifice who we are sacrificing our personal identity. With this, we come on to the role engulfment theory. And this role engulfment theory says that when we over-identify ourselves with our job or our role in the organization as a job holder, what we experience is job engulfment. The job completely takes over us, it possesses us. And that's where we become one with the work. We don't exist. And when this job is taken away, when the job is no more there, when this organization is no more there, then the question that we ask is, what am I if I don't work? The hours that I used to clock in the organization, maybe an 8 hours or a 10 hours or a 12 hours work that I used to do associated with a job in an organization, when I lose that, I have this question, what am I if I don't work?
Absolutely. And I think, Eleanor, you took us to this journey step by step, absolutely brilliantly, in terms of from what it is to why is it really happening and why, the identity crisis really comes up. But also to share that this is actually happening everywhere in the world. People do associate themselves with their job. They do become one with the job. In fact, they felt always that this is desirable. Organizations always felt that you should work with passion, and overly large passion, that you become one with the job. Where's the problem then? So what's the real issue? So the problem in making your work, the problem is when we make our work our identity. And what's the problem then? The problem is that our doings become our identity. So whatever I do in the organization, I start associating myself only to that definition. And this is who I am. So for example, when you're doing the introduction in the morning, you were talking about your role. And that's where this is what you do. So that becomes your identity. But the being of the person, who am I as a person, really is left behind. And that is more vast than what I do. It is interconnected, but then it's also a little more vast, a lot more vast, in fact. So the potential, our true potential, our vastness as a person beyond this job is somewhere lost. And in a way, I should say, it's telling us that we risk losing ourselves rather than risking losing our job. So it's okay to lose myself, but I can't lose my job because that job also gives me some identity, right? So I think this is something which brings us to identity crisis as a concept, just on a concept level. So the program doesn't have a lot of theory, but it has some small concept nuggets. So I'll move on to part B, and let's look at identity crisis now with an organizational concept, with organizational perspective. So far we were looking at an individual perspective. So now instead of talking about individual identities, we're going to shift our focus into organizational identities. So here's the question for all of you. Elora, can you take us through this?
Sure. Okay, so the question on your screen, if we were to represent an organization through a metaphor, then what would it be and why? We did a similar kind of exercise before, but there the focus was on the job holder. Now we do an exercise with the organization, and the question is, if you were to represent an organization through a metaphor, then what would it be and why? Priyanka says it's like the eagle vision, interconnection. Since my organization was in cloud infrastructure, it's like a mountain, values and integrity, a service provider. Santosh says it's like a tree. Okay, so I would appreciate if you can just put in a line there on why do you associate the organization with a tree, the metaphor that you're talking about. Like Tulsi said, it's a mountain. Why a mountain? That will help us understand your thought process, or maybe the image that you get about the organization in your mind, and what is that image about. A roof which gives us shelter. A tree, it grows and provides fruits and flowers, protection, safety, shelter. Interesting. A second home, a savior. A mountain because it's a journey to climb the peak. Peak is the vision. Yeah. A company is like the sun shedding light on the IT world. Okay. It's like the first home, the second home. Why the first home and why the second home? Okay, so let's move ahead with our next question. The next question is again, what attributes can you use to describe an organization's identity? So this question we'll again take on the Slido. The Slido link would be pasted here on the chat window. Yes, we have responses coming in on the Slido board. And if you look at the attributes people are identifying with the organization's identity, it talks about vision, purpose, ethics, people culture, mission, profitability, employee centricity, processes, dreams, passion. So let's move ahead. Adi, should we move ahead?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I just took a screenshot of this and let me take you back to where we actually were. So thank you, Elora, for taking us through this. And I think this was one of the best responses in terms of most interesting responses in terms of how you look at organizations and individuals as metaphors, and what attributes do you really look at organizations and individuals with. Let me take you through now the concept of organizational identity. Like we spoke about individual identity as a concept, but a short, quick concept on organizational identity. So what really is an organization, or what is it? What is its identity? So the three key words I would like to associate the organizational identity with. The first one is the identity of an organization is central. So something that has changed the history of the company. The second, it is enduring, something which is in the core, that is deeply ingrained, something that you cannot separate it from that organization. And the third, it is distinguishing, which also makes me different from every other organization in the same industry. So it is central, it is enduring, it is distinguishing. So think of what are the factors of your organization which are central, enduring, and distinguishing. What makes your organization unique in its own way? It's not necessarily that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's an attribute, and any attribute that makes your organization unique is a part of its identity. Something which is ingrained in your organization is a part of the identity. Something which is central to you is a part of the organizational identity. To explain this further, I would like to share also that organizational identity, because organization does not have its own life. It's given life by the people that work in the organization. It's also a function of a collective. And hence, it's a big responsibility, and big responsibility on everybody who works in the organization, because collectively they are creating that particular identity. Yeah. So this is just a brief note about what is an organizational identity, and there's a little more to this too. So what's more to this? Let's see that.
Okay, we just got to know that organization identity is a function of collective. It's formed by all the individuals who are working in the organization. Now, we're telling here that organization identity is a dynamic dialectic process. What does that mean? Organization identity can be looked at from two different perspectives. What are those perspectives? One perspective is at the individual level. So organization identity at the individual level, and the second perspective is organization identity at the organizational level. And both these, they kind of feed each other. You know, it's like the chicken and egg story. Which one first? So both of them, they happen together and they kind of feed each other. So what is organization identity at the individual level? Organization identity at the individual level is all the members of the organization. They associate with this organization. They are the member of this organization. And when we say they're the member of this organization, they associate this with this organization through some membership. They need some kind of organization attribute association to be a member of that particular organization. And when we say identity, organization identity at the organizational level, then this identity is formed by the agglomeration of all the distinctive attributes of the individual members. So therefore, we can say that organization members both shape and are shaped by their organizational membership, and this is the dialectic process. So they contribute to the organization identity, the individual members, and they in turn get impacted by the organization's identity. So it's a two-way process. Now here, a very important thing is to understand why are we talking about organizational identity here? Because an organizational identity is a cognitive and emotional foundation to build meaningful relationships and connections. When we identify with an organization, on what basis do we identify? We identify with in terms of our the meaningful relationship and associations, the connections that we are able to make with that organization. Yeah. So this is all about organization identity. We will delve a little more deeper on this going ahead. But before that, there is a survey that we talked about at the beginning of the program. And this is really the heart of this webinar today. So we want you to take a minute to please click on the link and respond to the survey questionnaire here. So moving ahead, we move ahead and we reach the last part of our program. The first part, we touched upon individual identity. The second part, we touched upon organization identity and what does it really mean. And then the third part takes us to part C, which is about coexistence of both these identities. How would it be, or how would it look like if the individual identity and the organizational identity both is held strong together at the same time?
So we'd like to explore this, what Elora just said. We'd like to explore this through a question, a chat storm question. On the screen, you're seeing two screenshots of the two attribute-based questions that we asked you. On the left-hand side, you're seeing the individual job holder attributes. On the right-hand side bottom, you're able to see the organizational attributes here. I want you to take a moment to go through both the slides. In case if you're logging in from your phone, you can pinch and zoom to see it a little more closely so that you can read the few attributes as well. And answer the question which you're seeing on the screen here. And the question is, what do you notice on these boards? So what do you notice when you look at both the boards together? Interesting. So The difference in individual and organizational attributes, different attributes are there in both the boards. We also see that individuals and organizations can coexist. Purpose can be achieved with passion. Interesting. Organizations provide an opportunity to the individuals, and individuals collectively lead to the organizational success. Okay, interesting. Purpose and vision, which become more beautiful when extended beyond organization and job roles to the person we are as a whole. The goals go hand in hand. There's a correlationship between the attributes and they're interlinked. It's amazing. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We are drivers to achieve the organizational goals. Organizational identity as an entity on its own is nothing without its people. This is superb. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, all of you who have asked the question. I'm going to put a marker here. I want you to pause answering this question now. So I'm just putting a marker so that we can separate the response for the next question. I'm now moving on to the next.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. The metaphorical exercises that we did, we have the responses here on both sides. So the question now to you is, what feelings does the metaphorical exercise evoke in you with respect to the current crisis? We did that metaphorical exercise where we talked about metaphors for the individual job holder, and we talked about metaphors for organization. So what feelings did both these metaphors together evoke with respect to the current crisis? Can we have some feelings on the chat window? What were the feelings that you encountered within you when we wrote these metaphors? So Sudesh answers a sinking ship. So what is that sinking ship? Is that sinking ship a metaphor for the organization? So we'll talk about feelings here. Okay, like Hemant says, it's a feeling of insecurity. So he encountered a feeling of insecurity within him. Okay. Milind says, am I getting to know my identity, or am I making my identity or losing it? So that's a thought, Milind. That's a thought. We will just touch upon the feelings. What feelings did it evoke? Okay, for Milind, it was confusion. He was confused. Tulsi says, do I see myself beyond my organization, or have I made it my identity, my life? Yes, that's a thought again, Tulsi. What did it evoke in you? What feeling got evoked? Sudesh says anxiety. Yes. So a sinking ship was his metaphor, and he talks about anxiety. Yeah. Priyanka says it's fear, but later adaptability and possibilities. Okay. Santosh says, frankly, I felt that during this crisis, both job holder and organization were worried of themselves and their future. So what feeling did it evoke? A feeling of realization, positivity and hope, insecurity, fear. Okay, once this crisis doesn't end, what if this crisis doesn't end? Okay. Opportunity to evolve in all spheres of life. So Parag, I want you to think on what was the feeling that got evoked? Worry. Santosh says worry. Helplessness. Yes. So should we move ahead?
Absolutely. I think the
amazing responses. Yeah.
Amazing. It looks like an ocean of things.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all your responses there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so let's go to the last question in the series here. Now that we looked at what are you noticing, you also checked about your feelings. What insights can you draw from both the boards together? So what meaning can you make? What connections are you looking at? So what insights can you draw from both the boards together? So please go ahead and put your responses. Looking for your response in the chat window. See if you can make some meaning, some connections, some interdependencies, any kind of insight, or anything beyond that too. If attributes of a job holder and organization matches, it will prioritize for both. Interesting, very interesting, Parag. Thank you. Tulsi says, These attributes exist, but how well we have been consciously leveraged, focused, and practiced. True. Super. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we'll move on from here now. And I would request you to pause your responses so that we can move on to the next section.
So what we're going to talk in our next section is how can both these identities coexist? And why is it important for them to coexist? What are we gaining and what are we losing when they don't coexist? So as covered earlier, we talked about how one influences the other, and I would like to reiterate this with the slide put up here. So if you see here on the slide, it talks about identity at the individual level and identity at the organization level. They are interrelated. They somehow talk to each other. So the individual behavior influences organization identity, and the organization identity in turn influences the individual behavior. It is reciprocal in nature. But what is key thing here to note is the word identification. So what do we identify with? When we are members of the organization, we look for that membership. So what is this membership? This membership is nothing but our identification with the organization. How do we identify with the organization? And when do we identify with the organization? So identification as a construct can be understood as creating a kind of mental bridge between an individual and organization. And if you look at building the bridge, bridging the gap between the individual identity and organizational identity, we have to bridge the gap through a strong identification where an individual relates to the organization he or she works for and feels that it is like a home. Like all the people, a lot of people said second home, but home in true sense, where we identify completely with the organization as an entity, but without losing our own individual identity. We know who we are, but we also kind of identify with the organization that we work for. And how does it help? It helps in building individuals' perception of self. We don't lose the individual perception of self. If a strong identification is built, then the individual will never lose its perception of self. And he will be able to relate to the surrounding world in a much better manner. And of course, the relationship with the associated organization will be better many folds. And nonetheless, to say this really comes, it really comes in handy. It really shows up. Its benefits are reaped at the times of crisis, when there's crisis everywhere, and organizations and individuals, they're looking for that identity. This kind of identification helps both ends. So now, like we discussed, that why to coexist? How will that help? And we covered that if there is a coexistence, then it can provide a safe membership, a healthy identification, especially in an insecure employment context. When there is a healthy identification, then both of us feel secure. The organization feels secure and the employees feel secure. So organization identity, when realized by the organization members, because it's a two-way process, then it has an effect on how strongly individuals in the organizations identify with their organization, even in times of crisis. And any kind of strong identification will lead to a stronger commitment, and a stronger commitment will lead to a realization of the organization goals as well as the individual goals. So now going ahead, we'll look forward to how to create that identification and commitment to an organization.
Thank you, Elora. And this brings us to the next question and the last question in the series here in terms of the boards. I'm sorry, there's a little text which is hidden, so I'll read up the question for you rather than taking off the presentation and then correcting it. So the question here is, again, look at the boards together. And when you look at these two boards together, the question is, how can you create an empowering culture which holds both the identities together? How can you create an empowering culture which holds both the identities together? So I want your ideas, some thoughts some creative ways that you can think of that can create an empowering culture which holds the individual identity as well as the organizational identity together. So go ahead, share your ideas. This is possibly the core question of the workshop. As I already mentioned, whatever gets created in this particular question gets documented and sent back to you. So in a way, you contribute to the community and the community is contributing to you, right? So please go ahead and answer this question in as many responses. You can give more than one response for this. So please bring your best participation for this particular question. So we say trust is the foundation of all relationships. And that's so wonderful, Milan, and this very interesting to see this as a first response here, which talks about enable trust amongst the levels in the organization. The second is open door policy, transparency, trust, effective communication. Wow, a lot of people talking about trust today, Elora, and I think I'm surprised to look at so many people talking about trust today. And you guys would also be surprised too. Why am I saying this now? So building trust, accountability, the work given by the organization, integrity, commitment, both have to build trust, empathize with each other. Interesting. Enable and encourage authenticity and trust to be open to new perspectives. Well, that's your nickname. Thank you. Righteous actions breed trust. Trust breeds respect, value attachment, which further leads loyalty, and rest all falls in place. Amazing. This is superb. Absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you who have responded to this. So like many of you are actually talking about trust, and I'm really well surprised. I thought that one or two people will talk, but I didn't know that this is such an important factor that you guys are considering. And even I'm going to talk about trust, but today we're going to explore a bit more about trust. We're going to see what it is. What does it really mean? And how do we look at trust in the context that we are speaking today? So trust in the context of identity crisis. So this is also what we're going to cover today. So you see right on the next slide, I had read your mind already. And so in fact, Elora had read your mind already, I should say that. So this is one of our core concepts out there. So culture of trust is an important component in bringing in bridging the gap between the individual and organizational identity. And when we say an important component, I think this is the foundation stone on which the individual and organizational identity stand together. So that's a key element that we are talking about. Now, what do we really mean by trust? And this is a beautiful definition right in front of you. So trust is the willingness to be vulnerable. So am I ready to risk it? Am I ready to be vulnerable? Is a willingness to be vulnerable based on positive expectations. So while I'm being vulnerable, I'm not also restless, I'm not anxious, but I'm having a positive expectation. And this positive expectation that the other person, that is you or anybody else, is not through words, actions, or decisions, not in any way through words, actions, or decisions, will act opportunistically. So you're not going to take the benefit of me in a way which is unfair, right? So you're not going to take me for granted. You're not going to act opportunistically towards me. So when I trust you, what I mean by that, I'm open to be vulnerable in front of you without being restless, but being positive, and the confidence that you won't take my advantage. And that's what trust really means. Now look at it on an organizational individual perspective. An individual, if he says that I'm trusting the organization, the restlessness is not there. There is confidence that the organization won't take its advantage. And the same applies to the organization as well. So it's basically the willingness to be vulnerable. What does that really mean? Is to take that risk, and it implies that something important is there to be lost. So if it is not important, there is no risk attached to it. Yeah. So with this, let's move on and talk a little bit more about trust.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about trust, we will cover the levels of trust. You know, there are 3 levels of trust, and both me and Adi, we were blown away completely with this when we read this, because the way we understand trust needs to be really understood. What we understand trust is a primary level function. We have never delved deeper in understanding trust. What we operate on is a very superficial level of trust. So this is the first level of trust, which is called calculus-based trust. Now let us understand what is this calculus-based trust. So calculus-based trust is kind of a negotiation. No, it's based on an economic calculation of what is lost by either party in case trust is broken. So there is always a negotiation, a bargain going on. What if I lose this? Should I be trusting? Should I not be trusting? Because there is a loss involved. So there is a calculation involved that what in case there is a loss. And how do we comply to this kind of trust? And how do we try to achieve this kind of trust? This kind of trust is always through a reward or a punishment. The reward of keeping up the trust intact by not doing anything which will hamper the other party and by being trustworthy. And the punishment is if the trust is violated, then your reputation gets at stake. I will do something for which your reputation goes at stake. And that's when the trust is violated. So there is always a bargain in the process of trust here, in the first level of trust. Now, going ahead to the second level of trust. So this level of trust is called a knowledge-based trust. You know, this knowledge-based trust, it develops over time. So it's a function of time, and it says that this gets developed as both the parties start interacting each other and knowing each other. So the more they know each other, the predictability increases. What predictability increases? You kind of predict the other person's behavior. You kind of predict the other person's intentions. And the higher the predictability, higher the trust. So because you kind of predict the other person, how will the other person behave, react, act, you kind of adjust accordingly. So information contributes to the predictability of the other person, which contributes to trust. Now, this is very interesting, the third level of trust, and very core to our concepts that we covered before. This is called an identification-based trust. So all the trust that we're talking about, you, me, we all are talking about on the chat and here now is this third level of trust. How do we create this third level of trust? And what does it mean, identification-based trust? This type of trust means that the truster fully internalizes the preferences of the other party. You know, it identifies with the other party. And when there is a strong identification with the other's desires, intentions, you know, objectives, why it is happening. There is a piece of empathy also involved. You kind of start looking at the other person by being in their shoes. Then that's where trust exists. Because the parties effectively understand and appreciate what the other person wants. They have a mutual understanding and each of them can effectively act for the other person. So the other person can also be confident that my interests will be protected and there will be no monitoring or control required. Without even my monitoring and control, there is a trust established that all that the other person does will be in my interest, you know, in the best favor of my existence. So that is identification-based trust. And this is so relevant today in the crisis times when we are talking about coexistence of organizations and individual identity. So how can we build this identification-based trust between the individual and the organization, that both of them identify with each other? The organizations hold the dreams, desires, passion, everything of an individual who walks into the organization. And at the same time, the individual also holds the values, the beliefs, the preferences, the goals of this organization. And how can they coexist and work together so that both of them are sure that it will be in the best interests without any control or monitoring happening between both. So with this, we say trust is a two-way process. Trust can never happen. It can never be a single way process, or it can never be managed single-handedly. It requires the contribution of both the individuals working in the organization and the organization. So understanding a little bit about what we are telling. So trust has two kinds of definition. At the individual level, what would it mean? Individual level, trust would mean that the organization processes its environment, the justice and there is perceived organization support. So for an individual, trust will be established when when it looks the organization processes uh, as supportive of the individual's goals or the whole individual. The environment, the organizational justice, and the perceived organizational support adds to the trust at the individual level. And when we talk about trust at the organizational level, it is a collective commitment. So it's a collective commitment of what? That we will have that commitment and cooperation of all our individual members working for that organization to achieve the bigger objective, the bigger organization.
Absolutely. I think this is wonderfully explained, Elora. And I was just thinking, you said we both were blown away with this concept of calculus-based trust and knowledge-based trust. And I think this is a key concept to understand. Letting you also know that the recording of this presentation would be available for you on YouTube. In case if you would like to go back to this concept, see this again, show it to people in your organization, you can definitely do that. Being a weekend, and I know that some of you must have, if you have missed a moment, don't worry, you're going to get a recording of this. But doesn't mean that you go, because there's a role for you guys to play. Okay, so let me take you through a case of trust during this crisis times. So what happens when somebody is asked to leave the job, or somebody gets laid off, and typically the person gets these feelings, and feelings that are associated are, why me? What wrong did I do? What did I do? And who am I without this job? Now, if you notice these questions well, actually, then you come to know that there is some belief around these questions, okay? That the organization has been unfair to me. I'm not good enough. There are feelings of anger. There are feelings of betrayal. There are feelings of being cheated. Or I gave so much to the organization, and what did I get in return? Why was I treated in this way? And all these feelings are basically reverse of trust. These are anti-trust feelings. So while during working, we all say that, yeah, we trust you and trust each other. But the moment somebody is asked to leave, all this gets replaced with these feelings, which also tells that trust wasn't there. So what truly trust really is? So can it be looked a little differently in this particular scenario? If you see, if the people who are asked to leave, you again as an HR professional, you may, I don't know, I don't hope so, but imagine there is a situation where you have to ask somebody to go, and a person is filled with these feelings, and you get to know the trust factor wasn't there really. Yeah. So let's talk a little more about this. And the entire idea, like we always, there's a quote around it that you treat others the way you want to be treated. But I would like to extend this to say that treat the employees in a way that they don't lose their identity. So once we ask people to go, because the survival is important for any reason, it's a strategic decision or whatever decision, but then they shouldn't be lost, right? We can't just dump people out. It's important that people, even after the job, also regain their own identities. And even if they're not a part of the organization, and that's the new definition of trust today, that when the person is here, I still value that person. When the person goes, I still value that person. And that's the true definition of trust in a way. So in fact, when we do this, it's also building the organization's identity. It's also creating a new identity for your organization. So with this, both the organizations and the individual identity, they actually stand tall with each other. And the entire thought around it is that trust actually fosters commitment and exploration. So it requires the organization and the individual to be committed to each other, and yet be able to explore newer ways of being, newer ways of doing, and so much with each other. So with this, I have Priyanka's comment here before I go ahead with the next one. When there's incongruence in what you believe, say, and do, then trust is lost. And absolutely true, Priyanka. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we can go ahead from here.
Yes, and we are going to take what Priyanka said. We're going to take this ahead. Very well said. We're going to talk about this incongruence. That congruence in your being and congruence in your doing. So congruence in what you say you are and congruence in what you do. Are they matching? If they don't, then the trust is lost. So here we are talking about how do we build trust-based culture? So while we looked at what is trust, so identification-based trust is what is given more importance. And how do we really build trust-based culture during crisis? And let me tell you here before we proceed any further on any of the points put up, that trust needs time. Trust takes time. It is not built in a day or two, and it's not at all a reactive process. So if somebody starts looking at it like a reactive process, that okay, now we are thinking of asking people to go now that the pandemic is here, so let's do some trust building activities before we announce, or we pass on this communication, it just doesn't help. Because trust is that unseen connection between two people, which gets built over time. And with time, it just becomes strong. If that trust is never there, it's not going to be there, even if it is, even all the activities are built around it, all the efforts are being taken to build it during that time. So it's a legacy that has to be carried forward. So with this, we move ahead with how do we build trust-based culture. So the first is we are talking about values. We are talking about the defined, lived, and practiced values, very much on the lines of what Priyanka said, that it is important and imperative, especially during crisis times, to look at our values, because our organization's identity stands tall on these values that we have defined for ourselves. And never than before, it is more important, like now, to define these values and live and practice them, not just define them and put them up on the wall. So the conduct of the organization and the decisions that the organizations make today, that will affect how people see the organization for years to come. And that will definitely impact the identification process with the organization. So going ahead, it is also important to see it's not only people leaving the organization where the organization's identity gets impacted. It's also the people who are still left behind in the organization. They have not been asked to go, but they are there in the organization. So their identification process with the organization gets hampered, and that's where we lose trust. Moving on to the second piece, it's one of the insights that we have put up here is to shift from a provider to an enabler. How can organizations shift from being a provider to an enabler? There are, we heard people talking about, we heard HR people talking about, the business leaders talking about the whole self to be brought to work. So this phrase is of utmost importance here, and it comes from the belief that the organization is no more a provider, it's an enabler. And if we are able to enable the individuals who enter the organization with their dreams, purpose, interests, passion, if you're able to enable them in a better way, hold their identity strong, then we are able to empower them and we move towards a trust-based culture. So it is about, if an individual doesn't enter your organization, the individual doesn't know who he is, but has entered your organization with all the dreams, purpose, passion that the individual has. Are you exploring it, and are you helping that individual find his own identity in that organization? That is moving from provider to enabler. Now coming on to the third point, shift from power holder to power distributor. What does this mean? So today organizations, how do organizations give power? What do? We disseminate information. Information is a way to hold power. And when by virtue of hierarchies created in the organizations, we kind of give power to few people in the organization to hold that information. In a way, we hold power. So the more dissemination of information possible is more distribution of power. The other way organizations can look at power is also moving from a privilege and role-based power to strengthening the personal power of an individual. What does that really mean? When one is associated with the organization, one is associated with a lot of benefits, rewards, with a lot of recognition and accolades that the organization give by virtue of the role that one holds in that organization. So these are all coming in terms of privileges. So these are all privilege-based power. And when you lose them, when you are no more a part of that organization, or you have been asked to go and you're not a part of that organization, you lose all these privileges. And in turn, you lose your own power, your own individual power. You fail to recognize that power. So here we are talking about, can organizations not only look at privilege and role-based power because they are just for some time to stay, but can we strengthen the individual power, the personal power of individual, and help them revive their individual identity? So the fourth point, we're talking about building resilience. So resilient organization means resilient individuals. And what does this mean? It means that their identity beyond their job is strengthened. These individuals, they no more associate only with their job. They just know if the job is not there, where do they stand? That's when real strengthening happens. And when they see hope beyond the confinement of the job and the organization walls, that's when they can stand independently on their own, is when we say that we've been able to successfully build a resilient organization. We are no more afraid of the uncertainties around it. With this going ahead, the last point captured here is the culture of exploration and risk-taking. When we are talking about building resilience to do away with all the uncertainties and stand strong in the face of uncertainty, it's very important that we build a culture of exploration where individuals they have that freedom to explore. What is it they like? What are they good at? What can they do? What more can they do? Different aspects of themselves as an individual, if they can explore, and they can take risk within that organization by being a part of that organization. That's when we say that we have built that trust, because organization has taken that risk to build the individual identity. So here we are talking about moving from only a skill-based approach to a skill and a strength-based approach. Can we spend some time to understand the whole person, the individual, who or she is, and understand what that person is good at? And that's when we say that we have built a strength-based culture. So here comes a quick recap of what all we talked about when we talked about building trust-based culture. First is the values lived and practiced. Second, we are talking about a shift of the organization from being a provider to an enabler. Third, we are talking about a power holder, a shift from a power holder to being a power distributor. Fourth is building resilience. And fifth captures exploration and risk-taking abilities. With this, we have come to the end of the workshop and keen to hear more from you.
Wow, it's interesting that I'm just going backtrack for about 3 weeks back when we thought of doing this program for the HR Interact group. Since then, there's so much of background work which has gone into it, some bit of research which has gone into it. So it was preparation, the HR Interact team was here, and now we have people here also participating so well for the workshop. And suddenly in this moment, I realized it's over. Okay, so like it was like a bullet train for us, and suddenly it has come to a halt. And it is really wonderful to have this journey reaching this point too, and to have you guys staying till now. Won't take much of your time now further because I know it's already 1:10, but I need 2 minutes more from you. Before that 2 minutes, we did 3 things today. One is exploring individual identity. The second is organizational identity. And the third is to see how they can coexist together. And we just didn't want to do brainstorming. So I think a lot of brilliant concepts. Some of them are Elora's, some of them are ours together, some of them are by some great work around. So it's like compilation of some of the best works that we tried providing you, so that it also opens our mind to think beyond what we are thinking. And this was the entire idea, to have some concepts at the end. So with all of this that we did today, right from the survey to the chat stumps, to the content, to the interaction, to the facilitation, I have two questions to ask you. Okay, the last two questions to ask you. The first one is, how was the program experience for you? So can you share your experience with us in 1 or 2 words? And separated by a comma in the same chat, let me know what is your biggest takeaway from the workshop. So 2 questions, what's your experience and what's your takeaway? Separate them by a comma and please put it on the same chat. I would love to hear from you all. What is your takeaway? It will help us understand the way we were thinking about certain concepts, which of them actually reached you. So it helps us as facilitators when I know what is your takeaway. So the link is with you. You can always go back and see those questions. That's a great compliment. Yeah, what are you saying? Elora, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Yeah, on the link, I just wanted to tell the group that we've been really trying to give it put it out in a research format, so that we're able to really delve deeper on this topic, because this topic seems to be of relevance and of importance to both individuals and organizations. And the idea is to share that research back with all of you, and so that you're able to also take some insights out of it and see how your workplace can benefit. So I would request all of you, now that the link is there, you yourself have taken the questionnaire, can you pass it on to the people in your teams, in your group, and people in your network, for them to be also able to answer as much as possible. So the more responses that we have from people around will also make it a very robust research. And of course, the report, when shared back, you'll find more value in it. So that's a request from our end, that the link, if can be shared, while we'll see how we can forward that link in our other communities, but it's also a request from our end to you, that if you can just forward it in your network to get more respondents. Thank you.
Thank you, Elora. So with this, I would request Sudesh to please come up and help us to close the session now. Yeah.
So, hi, this is Sudesh. First of all, on behalf of HR Interact, I would like to thank our esteemed facilitators, Elora and Adi, for their valuable time and such encouraging insights. Believe me, it was an awesome event. A lot of thoughts. I hope today in this session, all of us would bring back, this session will bring back our created confidence and a belief in self. We went through many thought-provoking perspectives, realizations, which will help us to understand ourselves better and our organizations better, and build a trust-based organization. Elora, once again, thanks to you. You've been the sponsor of the event today, and you have been wonderful. Thank you a lot. Adi, man with multiple hats. One, he was the sponsor for this event. He was facilitating this event and also ensured the smooth technical functionality of this platform. In fact, ensuring that it runs smoothly. Thank you, Adi. You have been always awesome. Thanks to our social media experts, Manish and Anshuman. While we were on this event, they ensured live updates on all the different social media handles. Last but not the least, all of you, our members, thank you for making your time and attending this event today. Hope you have been able to find yourself, whether you are independent or independent. And on this note, I would like to wish all of you a happy Independence Day. May the world soon be free from this current pandemic. Stay home and take care of yourself. See you in the next event. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Sudesh. Thank you. Take care, guys, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.